What if I told you the wide receiver with the second best analytics profile in this class is going early round 3 in Superflex rookie drafts, and that he's going to be on 100% of my dynasty rosters? In today's episode, I'll be breaking down the top 5 rookie wide receivers from this class. Let me just start off by saying that this isn't really a great wide receiver class, and this isn't a great rookie class as a whole, or at least outside of the top 3 picks in a 1 QB league or the top 6 in a super flex league. So if you are holding rookie picks, you might want to trade for a veteran or a future 2024 pick. I know that's not what you wanted to hear, but it's just the truth. However, I do feel really good about my wide receiver 1, and that's Jackson Smith-Njigba. The landing spot was pretty bad. He's stuck playing alongside 2 alphas in DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. His quarterback, Geno Smith, isn't great, and he's probably coming off the field in 12 personnel. If he landed in Green Bay, I would have guaranteed you he would catch 100 balls this year. It's not great, but it's not terrible. Tyler Lockett is turning 31 this year. Pete Carroll has a long history of hyper-productive slot wide receivers. Tyler Lockett, Doug Baldwin, Golden Tate. I could see the team cutting Tyler Lockett to save money after this year or the following year. The offensive coordinator, Shane Waldron, ran 11 personnel at the highest rate in the league when he was with the Rams. So maybe his slot status isn't a really big concern. And just ultimately, listen, he's really freaking good. Arguably, he's the second best fantasy wide receiver prospect to come out since Julio Jones and AJ Green. Or at least that's what my model says. As a sophomore, Smith-Njigba was competing for targets alongside Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave. Both were future top 12 picks and at least a year and a half older than he was. And yet in spite of that, Smith-Njigba was the alpha. He racked up 28% more receiving yards per game than Wilson and 45% more than Olave. Across his final 8 games that year, he averaged 157 yards per game with a low of just 97 yards. For perspective, that's 10 yards per game more than the FBS record. So he averaged 92.6 yards per game when sharing the field with 2 future top 12 picks. But if that wasn't impressive enough, he also averaged an impossible 288 yards per game in the 2 games that Wilson missed. Again, let me remind you just how good Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave are. Wilson totaled 1,100 receiving yards last year. He averaged 17.3 fantasy points per game in games Zach Wilson missed. He won Offensive Rookie of the Year. Chris Olave averaged 2.42 yards per route run. That was the 5th best mark by any rookie wide receiver since 2010. And now consider the fact that not only was Smith-Njigba the most productive of the 3 Ohio State wide receivers, but also just about anyone who would know has said Smith-Njigba is the most talented of the group. Heading into the 2021 season, Smith-Njigba had only 10 career catches to his name. Garrett Wilson at that time said that Smith-Njigba was the best of all of them. And then he said it again a few months ago. Chris Olave in 2021 said the same thing. Smith-Njigba is the best Ohio State wide receiver. He's better than me. He's better than Wilson. The team's wide receiver coach, Brian Hartline, also said the same thing. He said he would rank Jackson Smith-Njigba above the other 2 Ohio State wide receivers. And so did CJ Stroud. So why is he going 3 rounds later than these guys in dynasty startups? I don't know. To me, this is a Bijan Robinson level wide receiver prospect. Sure, JSN is a slot wide receiver, but that's not really a bad thing for fantasy. Just look at what Cooper Kupp, Keenan Allen, and Amon-Ra St. Brown have done. To me, drafting JSN today is like drafting Keenan Allen in 2013. Keep in mind, Allen has finished as a wide receiver 1 in fantasy in 6 straight seasons. And I think that's what you're eventually going to get from JSN. My wide receiver 2 is Quentin Johnson. He was the 2nd wide receiver drafted in round 1. He has a nice little landing spot alongside an elite quarterback in Justin Herbert. Mike Williams doesn't really worry me too much. He's mostly underwhelmed throughout his entire career. Joe Lombardi, the offensive coordinator, is no longer there. He was weirdly obsessed with Williams. It wouldn't surprise me if Kellen Moore already viewed Quentin Johnston as his wide receiver too. Johnston's top calling card is he's a freak after the catch. By career missed tackles forced per reception, Johnson ranks best of any Power 5 wide receiver since at least 2014. By career yards after the catch per reception, he ranks 18th best. Johnson's numbers are really good, but I think my favorite stat is this one. Throughout his career, TCU averaged 247 passing yards per game in games he played, but in the 6 games he missed, the average only 172 passing yards per game. It's typically pretty hard to divorce wide receiver production from quarterback play, or to exactly quantify a player's impact to their passing game, but in this case, it's easy. TCU was 42% better with Johnston on the field. Among all wide receivers in this class, he ranks third best by career yards per route run, behind only Jackson Smith-Njigba and Marvin Mims. And unlike many of the other names, Jordan Addison, Jalen Hyatt, Josh Downs, Johnson played almost exclusively outside instead of in the slot, where it's much easier to put up numbers against softer competition. But had that been the case, his numbers might have been JSN levels of good. Last season, he averaged 6.1 yards per route run from the slot. That's the third best mark by any Power 5 wide receiver since 2015. All of this sounds pretty great, but unfortunately Johnson did have some pretty big red flags. Remember, this isn't really a great wide receiver class. Johnson's biggest red flag is that 27% of his career targets came as contested targets. That ranks second worst in the class and put him against a truly frightening list of names. JJ Arcega-Whiteside, Nico Collins, Josh Palmer, Denzel Mims, Hakeem Butler, Tylan Wallace, Tyrus Marshall. Those are some of the names who had similar draft capital and a similar contested target rate. Basically, what this implies is he struggled to get separation in college. And if you struggle to get separation in college, you're going to struggle to separate in the pros. And if you struggle to separate in the pros, you're probably not going to be scoring many fantasy points. If that wasn't bad enough, it gets worse. Although Johnson saw a high number of contested targets, he wasn't very good at converting them into receptions. In fact, his career contested target conversion rate ranks worst among the top 15 wide receivers in this class. That's definitely a big concern, but every wide receiver after him also has some pretty damning red flags, and they just don't have the analytics profile that he had. My wide receiver 3 is Jordan Addison. He went one pick after Zay Flowers, who went one pick after Quentin Johnson. The landing spot seems pretty great. Minnesota badly needed a wide receiver too. I like the coach. I like the quarterback. And if you look at Addison's box score numbers and his 2021 Biletnikoff trophy, his profile looks great. Unfortunately, it doesn't look so good if you do some more research beyond that. Addison put up similar numbers and won the Biletnikoff over Jackson Smith-Njigba in 2021. But he also ran 143 more routes. That's a massive advantage. Smith-Njigba led the Power 5 in yards per route run that year, but Addison only ranked 8th. Keep in mind, both players played with round 1 caliber quarterbacks, and JSN had much tougher target competition going against top 12 wide receivers, where none of Pittsburgh's receivers are NFL caliber. Again, his 2021 numbers look great, but they're really not that much better than the average Mark Whipple wide receiver 1. That was Pittsburgh's offensive coordinator, and any profitable college football DFS player would know Whipple has long been known as something of a fantasy cheat code for wide receiver 1s. Again, Addison averaged 2.94 yards per route run with Whipple in 2021, but that was less than Trey Palmer in 2022, and that was less than Andy Isabella in 2018. And all those guys had immensely worse quarterback play than a round 1 caliber Kenny Pickett. And Addison's numbers last year weren't really great. And that was despite playing with the best quarterback in football, Caleb Williams. Sure, he played hurt for a portion of the year, but the team also averaged nearly 100 more yards per game in the games he sat out. So sort of the reverse of Quentin Johnson. Digging deeper into his production profile, you see a lot of manufactured touches via screens. You see a lot of scheme production, a lot of deep slot targets, and a lot of rub routes and pick plays designed to get him open. So basically, sure, at first glance, his profile looks great, but digging deeper, I see a lot of fraudulent production. I see that he was heavily aided by scheme, that he wasn't beating cornerbacks one-on-one as much as you'd like to see. This is all really worrisome, but it's not even Addison's biggest red flag. And that's that he's only 173 pounds, which means he has to be an outlier. He's either going to join Deshaun Jackson and Devonta Smith as an outlier, or he's going to be another bust like all other sub 180 pound wide receivers. But not only is he skinny, he's also not a great athlete. He recorded the exact same 40-yard dash time as Delaney Walker, except Walker's 67 pounds heavier. So ultimately, he is my wide receiver 3, but based on where everyone else has him, I'd probably rather trade out of my pick than take him. My wide receiver 4 is Zay Flowers, and unfortunately, that's another player I'm not very high on. But he is my wide receiver 4. Like Addison, his size is a major issue. His 29.25-inch arms are in the 2nd percentile. His 5'9" height is in the 8th percentile. Since 1997, there have only been 2 wide receivers to measure in at the same height or less and post multiple 1,000-yard seasons in their career. That's Steve Smith and Wes Welker. His draft capital was good. He was drafted ahead of Addison in round 1. But the landing spot was much worse. A run-first, somewhat inaccurate quarterback that still has Mark Andrews, OBJ, Rashad Bateman, and Isaiah Likely to throw to. That's not great. But my biggest knock on Flowers is just that his production profile wasn't really good. It was pretty mid. late round 2, early round 3, rather than late round 1 caliber. By some of my favorite metrics, yards per route run, age adjusted yards per route run, yards per team pass attempt, yards after the catch per reception, it was all very mid. But in his defense, the offense was pretty garbage. The quarterback was terrible. And he was elite by yardage market share and touchdown market share, which may be the only stats you could pop if your quarterback is that bad and your offense is that bad. The only problem is those metrics aren't really that predictive. And especially if we don't control for target competition. And in Flowers' case, his target competition was minimal. So again, Flowers is my wide receiver 4, but he's not someone I'm all that excited to draft. Unlike my wide receiver 5, who is a player I'm going to have on all of my teams. Drum roll, please. Ladies and gentlemen, your sleeper of the year. Wide receiver 5, Marvin Mims. Marvin Mims has the second best analytics profile of any wide receiver in this class. That's if you throw out draft capital. If you include it, he falls to wide receiver 5. But minus draft capital, basically what the numbers are telling me is that this is the second best wide receiver in the class. You factor in that the NFL was a lot lower on him, and okay, he's my fantasy wide receiver 5 in this rookie class. Make no mistake, this is a player I absolutely love, and here's why. As a high school senior, Marvin Mims gained over 2,600 receiving yards. That was the most by any player in our nation's history. He also ended his high school career with a Texas state record, 5,485 receiving yards. Okay, granted, high school production doesn't always neatly correlate with NFL success. So what happened next? Mims found immediate success at the college level, averaging 4.07 yards per route run as an 18-year-old true freshman. That was good for the 7th best mark by any Power 5 wide receiver since 2015. Or if age adjusted, it's the 2nd best mark of any Power 5 wide receiver since at least 2017. The following season, Mims averaged 17.2 yards per target. That's the most by any Power 5 wide receiver since at least 2015. That mark is also well ahead of the next closest receiver on that list, and the top 10 is a stack list. Since 2017, here are the names in order. Marvin Mims, CeeDee Lamb, Jamar Chase, Devonta Smith, Terry McLaurin, Emmanuel Hall, Jackson Smith and Jigba, Jalen Hyatt, Jalen Waddle. So I don't know about you, but that stat seems pretty predictive to me. Last year, in 2022, with his 3rd different quarterback, his 2nd different head coach, his 3rd different wide receiver coach, Mims had his most productive season yet. He had over twice as many receiving yards as the next closest receiver on the team, and he was again hyper efficient. He ranked 5th best in the class by yardage market share, 4th best by yards per team pass attempt, and better yet, he averaged 8.2 yards after the catch per reception. That was the 2nd best mark of any Power 5 wide receiver in this class. That's another pretty predictive stat. But when looking at his collegiate resume in totality, things look even more impressive. Among all Power 5 wide receivers in this class, excluding JSN, Mims ranks 1st in career yards per route run, 1st in career yards per route run when lined up outside, 1st in career yards per target, 1st in career depth adjusted yards per target over expectation. And the fact that he led this class in career yards per route run on the outside is huge. Remember, it's way easier to produce in the slot in college than outside. So his analytics profile is great, and his athletic profile is also great. He recorded 91st percentile scores in the 40-yard dash and by burst score. He weighed in heavier and ran faster than all of Jalen Hyatt, Zay Flowers, Josh Downs, and Jordan Addison. Obviously, people see the Denver landing spot with Judy, Sutton, Patrick, Hamler all there, but I was ecstatic when they took him. Round 2 draft capital. All right, sure, that's not as good as the top 4 names on our list, but that's not bad. And it came via a trade up. This was the first pick Sean Payton ever made as a member of the Broncos. This was his guy. And Sean Payton has a great track record with round 2 wide receivers. Since becoming a head coach, he's only ever taken 4 wide receivers in round 2. Robert Meacham, Brandon Cooks, Michael Thomas, and now Marvin Mims. Something I think a lot of other dynasty analysts miss when weighing landing spots is overlooking the importance of what I call regime uncertainty. Remember back to guys like Laviska Shenault and Denzel Mims when they were drafted in round 2. Their head coach was ecstatic to take them. They had a clear vision on how they were going to be used. But then shortly after, the head coach gets fired, a new coach comes in, and he just doesn't care about them, doesn't fit their offense. But in this case, we have an offensive genius in Sean Payton. This is the first draft pick he ever made as a member of the Denver Broncos, and he's going to be there for a really long time. So yeah, I feel great about this. Wide receiver 5 in this class, a player I want on all of my teams, Marvin Mims, no matter what. To see my full profiles and write-ups on this wide receiver class, or my full top 36 rankings, check out the links in the description or head over to fantasypoints.com. If you like this video, please comment, like, and subscribe. And if you do, I'll keep doing them.